A human saved a wounded orc, and the price was belonging to her forever. What seemed like a simple act of kindness hid something far greater. And when 7 men came to take her back, by choice or by force, something unexpected happened, and nothing was ever the same. The war had ended 5 years ago. That was what the papers said. That was what the leaders said. That was what the people of Dunhollow repeated every time someone brought it up at the tavern, as if saying it enough times could make it true. Harlan Voss never repeated it. He would listen, nod, and stay quiet. At 38, Harlan had a face worn by sun and wind, shoulders bent by a tiredness that sleep never fully cured. He had fought in the final years of the war. He had watched the treaty get signed. He had returned to his cabin, 1.5 kilometers outside Dunhollow in the heart of the Frost Hollow region, and tried to live as if none of it had happened. The cabin was simple. Dark wooden walls, an iron stove in the center, 2 small windows glazed with frost in winter. He kept a few chickens, owned an old horse he called Bone, and hunted when the pantry ran low. He did not talk much to the villagers. They respected that. The treaty said all prisoners had to be freed. Every single one. Both sides had agreed. It had been written down, stamped, and sent across the land. Harlan believed in it the way a man believes in a fence, useful, but only as strong as the people who choose to respect it. He had heard rumors. Nothing solid. Just the kind of thing men say after a second cup at night, voices low, eyes avoiding each other. That some farmers in the outer lands had not let go. That some orcs were still being kept. That the peace existed on paper, not in barns. He never investigated. It wasn't his place. He was just a veteran trying to grow old quietly. But Frost Hollow had a way of pulling things into the open, whether people wanted them seen or not. That morning, Harlan had gone out early to check his traps near the eastern tree line. The cold was sharp and clean, the kind that turned your breath into small clouds. Snow had fallen through the night and covered everything in a thick white silence. His boots crunched with each step. He had set 4 traps the day before. 2 were empty. 1 held a small fox, which he reset after taking. The 4th was near the edge of the open field, where the trees gave way to a long stretch of flat ground. He was crouching to reset the last trap when he heard it. Hoofbeats, not the slow, steady sound of a rider in control. Fast, uneven, desperate. He stood and turned. A dark horse came tearing across the white field, moving with everything it had. There was someone on its back, barely. The figure was slumped forward, gripping the mane with both hands, swaying with every stride. Harlan stepped into the open and raised one arm. The horse saw him. It slowed, not because it was trained to, but because it was exhausted, its flanks heaving, foam at its mouth. The figure on its back did not slow. She slid sideways and fell into the snow without a sound. Harlan was already moving. He reached her in seconds and crouched down. He turned her over carefully, and his breath caught. She was an orc, young. Her skin, a deep jade green, was pale and dull with cold. Her lips were cracked, her cheekbones pressed hard against her face. She wore almost nothing for this weather, torn leather, thin and worn through in several places. She was not a warrior. She was not a threat. She was someone the world had tried very hard to destroy. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked her up and carried her toward the cabin. He did not stop to think about what it meant. He just walked. Behind him, her horse followed without being asked, as if it already understood that something had changed. She did not wake for 2 days. Harlan laid her on his cot near the stove and covered her with every blanket he owned. He peeled away the torn leather carefully, checking each wound without looking away, long marks on her wrists, old bruises, faded yellow and green, cuts on her arms that had healed wrong, scarred over without care. He had seen wounds like these before, not from battle, from captivity. He cleaned everything with hot water and cloth. He wrapped what needed wrapping. He kept the fire burning through the night, waking every few hours to feed it more wood. Bone, his horse, shifted restlessly in the small stable attached to the cabin. The orc's horse had been given water and hay. It had calmed quickly, as if grateful just to stand still. On the second night, she made a sound. It was small, a sharp breath, like someone surfacing from deep water. Harlan was awake in an instant, moving to the cot. Her eyes opened slowly. They were dark amber, almost gold in the firelight. Wide, terrified. She pushed herself back against the wall before he could speak, knocking the blanket off, her body tensing as if preparing for a blow that never came. Harlan did not move. He stayed where he was, crouched a few steps away, hands open and visible. "You're safe," he said, simply, quietly. She stared at him. Her breathing was fast and ragged. "You fell off your horse," he continued. "Out in the field. I brought you inside. You've been here 2 days." She said nothing. Her eyes moved across the room, the door, the window, the stove, back to him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Harlan said. "I have food, water, when you're ready." She did not respond, but she stopped pressing herself into the wall. That was enough for now. He left a cup of water and a piece of bread near the cot and moved to the far side of the room. He sat in his chair, wrapped in his coat, and let her be. By morning, the cup was empty and the bread was gone. She would not let him come close that first day. If he moved toward her, she tensed. If he spoke too quickly, she flinched. He learned to move slowly, to keep his voice low, to give her space before she asked for it. He brought broth, then cooked grain, then dried meat. She ate everything he left, always after he had stepped away. On the 4th day, she spoke. "Why?" Her voice was rough, dry from disuse. Not a question so much as a fragment, a word broken off from something larger she could not yet say. "Why what?" Harlan asked. "Why did you bring me inside?" He thought about that for a moment. "Because you were in the snow," he said, "and I had a roof." She looked at him for a long time. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Her name, she told him that evening, was Lyra. She said it the way people say things they haven't been allowed to say in a long time. Like the name itself had been taken from her, and she was only now picking it back up. Harlan nodded. "Harlan," he said, pointing to himself. She repeated it once, quietly, as if testing it. Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls. The fire crackled. Somewhere beyond Dunhollow, out across the frozen fields and the roads between farms, something that had been hidden for 5 years was still waiting to be found. A week passed, then another. Lyra's body began to recover faster than Harlan had expected. Orcs were strong by nature. He had seen that during the war. But even so, the damage done to her had been deep. Not just to her body. She slept in long stretches, waking at odd hours, sometimes sitting upright in the dark with her eyes open and her hands gripping the blanket. On those nights, Harlan would stoke the fire without a word. The light seemed to help. She never explained why. During the days, she began to move around the cabin. Slowly at first, testing her legs, her weight. She touched things carefully, the rough edge of the wooden table, the iron handle of the stove's door, the small carved figure Harlan kept on the shelf above the window. It was a horse, worn smooth from years of handling. She held it for a long moment before setting it down gently. Harlan watched without commenting. She had eaten so little for so long that her body had learned to hold back, uncertain whether the next meal would come. He kept food available at all times, without making a show of it. Little by little, she stopped eating like someone who expected it to disappear. On the 10th day, she helped him carry wood from the stack outside. He had not asked. She had simply put on the coat he had left by the door and followed him out without a word. They worked in silence. Not the heavy, watchful quiet of her first days, but something easier, something shared. Word had already started moving through Dunhollow, the way words always do in small places. Old Renner, who lived along the road between the village and Harlan's cabin, had seen the 2 horses in the stable when he passed by. He had not stopped, but he had seen, and Renner, as everyone in Dunhollow knew, had a habit of saying little and remembering everything. By the time the second week was out, the tavern had the story, or pieces of it. A veteran, a stranger, something green glimpsed through the window. Some people shrugged. Harlan had always kept to himself. It wasn't anyone's business. Others were not so easy. A man named Colton came by one afternoon, claiming he needed to borrow a hand axe. Harlan lent it to him, standing in the doorway, not inviting him in. Colton's eyes moved past Harlan's shoulder into the dim interior, slow and deliberate, the way a man looks when he is not really looking for anything, just confirming what he already suspects. "Got company?" he asked. "Just resting," Harlan said. "I'll get that axe back to you." Colton left. His walk back toward the village was slow and thoughtful, the walk of a man turning something over in his mind, deciding what to do with it. Harlan watched him until the road bent and took him from sight. Inside, Lyra had stayed still near the back wall. She had heard every word. "They know I'm here," she said when Harlan came back in. "Some do," he admitted. She looked at the floor. "Is that dangerous for you?" "Could be inconvenient," he said. "Not dangerous." She did not look convinced. He pulled his chair close to the stove and sat down. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said. "But if you want to, I'll listen." She was quiet for a while. The fire ticked and settled. "I was taken during the war," she said finally. "I was going to be released after the treaty, but I wasn't." Her jaw tightened. "The man who held me said the treaty didn't apply to what he called property. 5.5 years. The fire popped once, loud in the silence. Harlan kept his hands still and his face calm, because the anger moving through him was not hers to carry. "Where?" he asked after a moment. "Close," she said quietly. That single word settled into the room like a cold draft under the door. It did not go away. 3 weeks after she had fallen from the horse, Lyra was strong enough to walk the length of the cabin without holding the wall. Harlan marked the progress quietly, without ceremony. She still slept too little and woke too often. Some nights she sat near the window, watching the dark outside with those amber eyes, reading something in the shadows that he could not see. During the days, she talked more, each word still chosen and tested, but slowly a shape emerged from the fragments she offered. She had been 20 years old when the war took her, a winter raid on her clan's camp. She had been separated in the confusion, captured before she could reach her weapons, taken east and sold before she understood what was happening. She never said the man's name. She called him only the farmer. Harlan had already begun to form a picture without needing details. 3 kilometers from his cabin, on the far edge of the fields, stretching south of Dunhollow, sat the Brome farm. Silas Brome, 46 years old, large landholding, a reputation for being hard but fair, or so people said. Harlan had never had cause to think much about him before. He thought about him now. He said nothing to Lyra about what he suspected. There was no point until he was certain. What could not wait was what happened on the last day of the 3rd week. A boy from the village came to the door, 12 years old, breathless from running. "Mr. Voss," he said, "my ma sent me, says you should know. Silas Brome's been asking around, asking if anyone's seen a loose orc in the area." "Asking who?" "Everyone, the men at the tavern, old Renner, even Pastor Gill." "What did people say?" The boy hesitated. "Some said nothing, but Colton—" He stopped. "Colton talked," Harlan said. The boy nodded and looked at his boots. It made sense. Colton had been turning something over since that afternoon at the door, and a man like that eventually puts it somewhere. Harlan thanked him, gave him dried meat for the road, and watched him run back toward the village. Inside, Lyra stood by the table. She had heard every word. She was very still, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from someone holding themselves together by force of will. "He's going to come," she said. "Probably," Harlan agreed. "You don't have to be here when he does." "I live here," he said simply. Something moved across her face, fast, almost hidden. Not quite a smile, not quite relief. Something smaller and more fragile than either. She sat down at the table and folded her hands on the wood. Harlan sat across from her and did the same. Outside, the sky had gone heavy with grey cloud. Snow was coming. He could feel it in the way the air had gone still and waiting, the world holding its breath before something it could not stop. The storm arrived 3 days later and did not announce itself. It simply came, heavy, white, absolute, dropping snow so thick that the tree line vanished by mid-morning. Harlan stacked extra wood, checked the stable, filled every container with snow to melt. Lyra helped without being asked, moving with a calm efficiency that had replaced the fearful hesitation of her first days. By evening, they sat near the fire, the wind pushing against the walls in long, low groans. It was in that stillness that Lyra finally spoke the truth she had been carrying. "There is something I haven't told you," she said. Harlan looked at her steadily. "All right. I am not simply a clan member." A pause. "My father is Gorvak, clan leader of the Green Shade, the largest orc clan in the Eastern Territories." She said it quietly, as if the name itself carried years of weight. "He is a large man, older now, a scar across his left jaw from the First War. He used to say it was a reminder that surviving is not the same as winning." "You're his heir," Harlan said. She nodded. "When I was taken, my father was told I died in the raid. A body was found. It wasn't mine, but no one could confirm it. He believed it. Everyone believed it." Harlan thought of the years that had passed. 5 years of a father building a grave in his heart for a daughter who was not dead, but locked away 3 kilometers from where Harlan ate his breakfast each morning. "Does Brome know who you are?" he asked. "He knew during the war. I think he kept me because of it. Leverage, he thought. But the peace came and nothing came of it, and I became inconvenient to release and too useful to let go." She said it without emotion. That flatness was the most chilling part. "Your father," Harlan said, "if he knew you were alive, he would come," she said immediately, "with everything he has." Harlan nodded once and stood to add a log to the fire. He did not say what he was thinking, that peace could be signed on paper while the thing that made it real was missing entirely. Not far away. 3 kilometers down a snow-covered road. He sat back down. They sat in the firelight while the storm pressed on and the snow piled against the door. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet thought formed. Not a plan yet, barely an intention, just the shape of something that had not yet become a decision. He looked at Lyra across the fire. She was staring at the flames, her amber eyes steady and unreadable. He had a feeling she was thinking the same thing. The storm lasted 4 days. When it passed, the snow outside reached Harlan's waist in places, and the road to Dunhollow had vanished under white. The world was silent in the way only hard winter makes it, not peaceful, but held still by force. They were not idle. Lyra showed him small things, ways of reading weather, how to find wind direction with damp fingers raised slowly. Small knowledges, offered without weight. On the 3rd day of the storm, she found his carved horse on the shelf again and held it the same way she had weeks before. "This is old," she said. "My mother carved it, when I was young. You don't talk about her. She's gone. I'm sorry." "Long ago," he said. "Don't be." She sat across from him and picked up a torn piece of her leather garment, working it back together with a bone needle from his repair kit, her hands moving with quiet confidence. They sat like that for a while, both working, the storm outside pressing on the walls. "When the snow clears," Lyra said without looking up, "Brome will come. I know. He'll have men." "Likely." She looked up. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me." "I've been in worse situations than a farmer and his hands," Harlan said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she returned to her stitching, her shoulders dropping slightly. Something had released. The snow stopped on the 4th morning. By the second day after the storm, people from Dunhollow had broken through enough of the road that a rough path had formed. Boot wide at first, then wider, as life began moving again. By afternoon, the track to Harlan's cabin was passable on foot. That evening he walked to the village. He went to the tavern, sat at the bar, and asked for coffee. He spoke quietly with 3 men he had known since before the war, men who had also fought, who had come home changed, who had spent years trying to understand what the peace actually meant. He told them about Lyra, about Brome, about 5.5 years and 3 kilometers. The 3 men listened without interrupting. When he finished, none of them spoke right away. But the look that moved between them, slow, certain, told Harlan everything. He asked them to pass the word quietly to the right people, men who understood what the treaty meant, men who would show up if it came to that. He was back before dark. Lyra looked at him when he came in. "You went to talk to people," she said. "About what's right," he said. She was quiet. Then, "Do you think they'll come?" "I think some people have been waiting for a reason to show which side of the peace they're actually on." That night, for the first time since she had arrived, Lyra slept through until morning without waking once. Brome came on the clearest morning since the storm. The sky was pale blue and hard, every sound carrying farther than it should. The snow had packed into a firm crust that crunched under boots and hooves alike, still and tense on the surface, the kind of morning that feels like something waiting to happen. They were both outside when the riders appeared on the road. 7 of them. Brome at the front, thick-shouldered, heavy coat, flat-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was broad and reddened by cold, his expression the settled kind that men wear when they have convinced themselves they are in the right. The 6 behind him spread into a loose line, farmhands mostly, a couple with rifles, one with an axe at his belt. Harlan stood in front of the cabin door. Lyra stood slightly behind and to his right. Brome stopped 10 paces away and looked past Harlan at Lyra. Recognition crossed his face, and beneath it a cold relief, as if he had been afraid she had gone too far to find. "Voss," he said, almost friendly. "I appreciate you keeping her safe. I'll take her home now." Harlan did not move. "She's mine," Brome continued, his tone level, as if discussing livestock. 5 years. She knows the farm. I'm just taking back what belongs to me." "The treaty was signed 5 years ago," Harlan said. "All prisoners freed. Both sides agreed." "Prisoners, yes. Property is a different matter." The word fell into the cold air, like something dropped from height. "There is no such thing as Orc property under the treaty," Harlan said. "That was explicit. I read those papers differently." Brome shifted in the saddle. "I don't want trouble with you. You're a veteran, good man, but I will leave here with her, one way or another." The man with the rifle adjusted his grip, not raising it, but making sure it was noticed. Harlan looked at Brome steadily. "You rode out here with 7 men to take 1 woman who escaped from a barn. That tells me you already know you're in the wrong." Brome's patient expression faded. "Last chance," he said. Silence settled over the clearing. The snow was perfectly white. The trees at the edge stood without moving. Everything waited, and then, from the road behind Brome's riders, came the sound of boots in snow. They came from the direction of Dunhollow. Word had moved the way Harlan had hoped, from the 3 men at the tavern to their brothers and neighbors, passed over fences and through doorways in the days since the storm, quiet and deliberate, until enough people knew and enough had made the same decision. 20 of them, maybe more. Farmers, hunters, the blacksmith's son, 2 brothers from the feed supply. Some carried rifles, some had axes or hunting bows, a few carried nothing at all, which was its own kind of statement. They walked steadily, spreading into a wide line that curved behind Brome's riders without fully surrounding them, leaving the road south open. Brome turned in his saddle. The color in his face shifted. The man with the rifle lowered it slowly, without being asked. Old Renner was at the front, the same man who had seen 2 horses in Harlan's stable weeks ago, who had said nothing at the time, but remembered everything. He stopped a few paces from Brome's riders and stood with his hands at his sides. "Morning, Silas," he said. Brome stared at him, then at the others. He counted. The way a man counts when the numbers have stopped working in his favor. "This is private business," Brome said. The easy confidence in his voice had thinned. "Doesn't look private from here," Renner said. One of Brome's farmhands, barely older than a boy, had turned his horse sideways and was looking at the men from Dunhollow with something between surprise and relief, as if part of him had been hoping for an excuse not to be here. "The treaty says she's free," Harlan said. "These people know the treaty. You know the treaty. This ends here." Brome looked at Lyra one more time, long and different from before. The possession was still there, but underneath it something else. The beginning of understanding that he had already lost. "You're making enemies," he said. "Some things are worth it," Renner said simply. Lyra had not moved through any of it. She stood straight and still, eyes fixed on Brome with perfect calm. Not defiance, not hatred, just the gaze of someone who has decided this man will not define her anymore. Brome's youngest hand broke first, turning his horse quietly to the edge of the clearing. A second followed, then a third. Brome sat among those who remained. He looked at his men, at Harlan, at the line from Dunhollow. He pulled his reins and turned south without a word. His men followed one by one, their tracks cutting through the clean snow until they were small in the distance, then gone. No one cheered, no one spoke. The men from Dunhollow watched until the road was empty, then began the quiet walk home. Renner stopped beside Harlan. "Figured you might need some company," he said. "Glad you came." Renner looked at Lyra, pulled his hat off briefly, and nodded once. She nodded back. A small thing, a quiet thing, but it felt like something permanent, a mark pressed into the day that would not lift. They left 2 mornings after Brome rode away. Harlan packed light, food for the road, blankets, a spare knife. Lyra took almost nothing, only the folded cloth Harlan had given her and the bone needle she had used to mend her leather by the fire. Before they rode out, she paused at the shelf above the window and looked at the carved horse for a long moment. She did not touch it this time. She just looked, the way a person looks at something they want to carry without being able to. Harlan took it down and held it out to her. She looked at him. Then she took it and put it in her coat pocket without a word. They rode north and east. The flat, frost-covered fields of Frosthollow gave way slowly to gentle rises, then harder ground, then forests that grew darker and older with every hour, trees wider at the base, snow between them untouched by boots or wheels. The world thinned out around them until there was nothing but cold air and the crunch of hooves and the pale winter sky above. Lyra rode ahead, reading the land the way people read things they were born knowing. Harlan followed, watching the way she held herself differently out here, straighter, more certain, the posture of someone returning rather than fleeing. They did not talk much. But the silence between them had changed from the silence of strangers into something with weight and warmth. On the first night, they made camp in the shelter of a thick stand of pines. The fire was small and steady. They ate without ceremony. At one point, Lyra reached into her pocket and turned the carved horse over in her fingers, looking at it in the firelight. And Harlan watched her without saying anything. Some things did not need words. On the second day, the land opened into a wide valley as evening came. Below, in the growing dark, fires burned in long rows. The shapes of tents and larger structures rose against the sky, smoke climbing in slow, pale columns. The sound of voices, distant, then closer, drifted up through the cold. The green shade. Lyra stopped her horse at the ridge. She was very still, looking down at the camp the way a person looks at something they had stopped believing they would ever see again. A guard called out from below, sharp, questioning. Lyra answered. The silence after was the longest Harlan had ever sat through. Then the guard called again, a different tone. A name spoken like something recovered from the bottom of deep water. The camp below began to move. Gorvak came out of the central tent with 5 others. He was exactly as Lyra had described. Large and weathered, the scar pale across his left jaw, his jade-green skin marked by decades of open sky. He moved with the weight of someone who had carried grief for a long time and had stopped expecting it to lift. He stopped at the base of the ridge and looked up. Lyra rode down slowly. When she dismounted and stepped forward, Gorvak stopped 10 paces away. His face was doing something complicated, years of grief being pulled apart and remade by something that had no name for itself yet. He said her name once, quiet and broken. She walked to him and he put his arms around her, and neither of them moved for a long time. Around them, the camp had gone completely silent, every person watching, no one speaking. Harlan stayed on his horse at a distance, his hands loose on the reins. He felt the weight of what he was witnessing, the way one feels something ancient, not his to hold, but undeniably real. After a long while, Gorvak looked up. His amber eyes, the same shade as Lyra's, found Harlan across the snow. He studied him for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, the way men nod when words are not enough, and they know it. Harlan nodded back. That night there was celebration, fire and food and voices raised in welcome, the whole camp alive with sound. Harlan was brought in and given a place at the fire, food pressed into his hands, people watching him with open curiosity and no hostility. He ate and listened and felt, for the first time in many years, that the peace was not just a paper somewhere. It was here, in this fire, in these faces. He decided quietly that he would leave at dawn. It was simply the shape of the right thing. Lyra had her family, her world, her life waiting to be rebuilt. He had his cabin, his horse, his quiet. He rose before first light and began to saddle Bone. "You're leaving without saying anything." He turned. Lyra stood in the pre-dawn dark, a fur over her shoulders, her eyes gold in the low light. "Didn't want to make it difficult," he said. "It already is." He was quiet. "You saved my life," she said. "You stood in front of 7 men. You rode 2 days through winter to bring me home." A pause. "And now you're just going to leave." "I thought that was right." "I know," she said, "but I'm asking you to stay." The sky had begun to lighten at the eastern edge, black shifting toward deep blue. The camp was still. Everything was still. Harlan thought about the shelf above the window, now empty. He thought about 20 men walking out of a village in the snow. He thought about how long he had been living beside things without touching them. "All right," he said. Lyra looked at him steadily. "Destiny brought us to that field," she said. "The rest is a choice." He tied Bone's reins to the post and stepped away from the horse. The sun broke over the eastern hills, pale and clean, turning the snow gold. They walked back into the camp together. Behind them, at the edge of the tree line where the valley met the forest, a single crow landed on a branch and watched them go. It sat there for a long moment, perfectly still, its black eyes catching the first light of morning. Then it spread its wings and flew north, deeper into the wild lands, toward territories no one from Dunhollow had ever mapped. Something, somewhere, had taken notice. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound Legacy.